Some tomato plants survived weeks of rain. Others collapsed almost overnight. At first glance, every plant in this garden should have had the same chance. They're growing on the same support system, exposed to the same rain, the same wind, and receiving nearly identical care. Yet the results are already very different. Some plants are loaded with healthy fruit, while others are beginning to lose the battle. The surprising part is that it's still too early to know which varieties will truly come out on top. That's exactly what makes this garden experiment so interesting. Earlier in the season, we built this support structure with one simple goal. We wanted to give our tomatoes a place to grow naturally while allowing us to compare many different varieties under the exact same outdoor conditions. At the time, it was impossible to know whether the structure would make much difference. Young tomato plants often look equally healthy in the beginning. The real test comes later, after the weather starts challenging them. Now the plants have grown quickly. Many of them have reached the point where they need to be tied to the support. Once tomato vines become taller and heavier, they can no longer support themselves properly. Some branches begin leaning under the weight of developing fruit, while others become tangled with neighboring plants. Before anything else, our first job is simply to secure them to the structure and let them continue growing upward. As we walk through the garden, one thing becomes obvious almost immediately. Not every tomato is responding the same way. We can already see the first signs of disease appearing on some plants. A few leaves have started turning dark. Some stems are showing damage as well. Yet those same plants are still carrying clusters of young tomatoes. It's a reminder that tomato plants often continue producing fruit even while they're under stress. Most of the varieties growing here are cherry tomatoes. Many gardeners believe cherry tomatoes tend to handle difficult weather better than larger fruited varieties. That's one of the reasons we wanted to include so many of them in this trial. But every growing season is different. Instead of relying on assumptions, we're letting the plants show us which ones can actually tolerate weeks of rain, strong winds, and changing weather. Walking from one end of the row to the other almost feels like visiting several different gardens. Some plants still look green and vigorous. Others have already begun to decline. A few have blackened leaves that need immediate attention. Those damaged leaves won't recover, so they have to be removed before the plants can continue putting their energy into healthy growth and developing fruit. Even with those problems, there is still plenty of reason to stay optimistic. Healthy tomatoes are already forming throughout the row. Every cluster of fruit tells us that these plants are still fighting. The growing season is far from over, and the story hasn't been written yet. One thing we've learned over many years of gardening is that it's very easy to make conclusions too early. A tomato variety that looks weak in early summer may recover surprisingly well later in the season. On the other hand, a plant that looks perfect right now may begin struggling after another long period of wet weather. That's why we're not rushing to decide which varieties are winners and which are failures. We're simply observing, comparing, and giving every plant the opportunity to prove itself. Several plants have already shown they couldn't handle the previous rains. You can clearly see where the weather has taken its toll. Some leaves have turned almost completely black, and those need to be removed right away. Once the damaged foliage is cleaned up, we'll continue tying the remaining stems securely to the support structure. That basic maintenance gives each plant its best chance to continue growing without changing the conditions of the experiment. One of the most interesting parts of this project is that every variety is facing exactly the same challenge. The rain doesn't choose favorites. The wind doesn't either. Every plant has experienced the same storms, the same moisture, and the same changing temperatures. Yet some continue growing confidently, while others are already falling behind. That's exactly what we're here to discover. As we continue walking through the garden, there's one thing we have decided not to do. We aren't going to heavily prune these tomato plants. Many gardeners remove every sucker they can find, hoping for bigger harvests or better airflow. But that's not the purpose of this trial. Our goal isn't to see how tomatoes perform after constant intervention. We want to discover which varieties naturally handle difficult outdoor conditions. Because of that, we'll keep maintenance simple. We'll remove weeds that have grown quickly after all the rain, tie the plants to the support structure, and remove leaves that are clearly damaged. Beyond that, we'll let each variety show us what it's capable of on its own. Even though some plants are struggling, there are still plenty of tomatoes developing. Looking closely, you can already see clusters of green fruit hanging from many branches. That's encouraging because it reminds us that difficult weather doesn't automatically mean the season is over. Some plants continue producing even while showing signs of stress. Unfortunately, not every tomato has been as fortunate. A few plants simply couldn't recover after the previous storms. Their leaves darkened quickly, and now the disease has spread far enough that those plants may never fully bounce back. That's disappointing, but it's also valuable information. This is exactly why we grow different varieties side by side instead of relying on a single favorite. One variety that caught our attention has naturally dark-colored fruit, but even that plant has begun showing signs of disease. It proves that appearance alone doesn't tell the whole story. Every variety still has to prove itself under real growing conditions. The forecast isn't giving us much reason to celebrate either. More rain is expected, and because of that, we aren't planning any additional treatments. Instead of constantly changing our approach every few days, we'll continue observing how these plants respond. Sometimes nature provides the most honest test a gardener can ask for. This season has become less about chasing perfect-looking plants and more about learning. Every week brings another lesson. Some varieties surprise us with their resilience. Others remind us that impressive early growth doesn't always translate into long-term success. Not every tomato in this project is growing outdoors. We also planted some inside the greenhouse. Those plants are facing a completely different environment. They aren't exposed to the same endless rain or strong winds, so it will be interesting to compare their progress with the outdoor plants as the season continues. Will the greenhouse tomatoes stay healthier? Will they produce more fruit? Or will one of the outdoor varieties prove to be tougher than we expected? Those are questions we can't answer yet. The season is still unfolding, and that's what makes gardening so fascinating. Every year tells a different story. Looking across this row, it's easy to see why patience matters. If we judge these plants too early, we'd probably make the wrong decision. Some of the healthiest looking plants right now may struggle after another week of wet weather. Others that seem weak today could surprise us by recovering and continuing to produce. That's why we never choose our favorite varieties based on one quick impression. Instead, we watch, we compare, we take notes. And by the end of the season, the strongest plants make the decision for us. Those are the varieties worth planting again. Those are the tomatoes that earn a permanent place in the garden. For now, we'll continue tying the plants, removing damaged leaves, clearing away weeds, and letting nature reveal which varieties truly deserve to stay. This experiment isn't over. In many ways, it's only beginning. The next few weeks will tell us far more than everything we've seen so far. Which tomato variety do you think will survive these weeks of rain? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your predictions. And if you'd like to see which varieties actually make it through this challenging season, be sure to subscribe and follow along. We'll share the final results, compare the outdoor plants with those growing in the greenhouse, and reveal which tomatoes proved to be the toughest when the weather was at its worst. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next garden update.